Welcome. We are happy to have you here. And today, Hanna Ylöstalo will be talking about feminism, economic and political imagination. And Mattias Lehtinen will act as discussant and discuss Hanna's ideas. This is our first session this fall in our ReSES ID seminars. And our project is funded by the Finnish Cultural Foundation. Also, as an advertisement at this point, we will be arranging several events also in October. So we will have Edward Nikkan talking about platform capitalism in the via Zoom. And then we will have Geoffrey Hodgson talking about the origins and development of capitalism. So we will have several events concerning capitalism in the now and also in next month. And my name is Anita Välikangas, and I will be chairing this session. So, and first, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. So, Hanna Ylöstalo works as a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Turku, and her research interests are in the fields of feminist political economy, political sociology, and gender equality policy research. And her current research is concerned with the shifts in gendered society-economy relations and their influence on feminism and gender equality policy. And Hanna also leads a research project entitled Equality to Economy, Feminism to Fiscal Policy, FemTie, which is funded by the Kone Foundation. We are happy to have you here, Hanna. And then Mattias Lehtinen will be acting as discussant, and Mattias is a researcher in practical philosophy at the University of Helsinki. Lehtinen has recently defended his doctoral dissertation entitled Political Ontology and Imagination, Contours of a Democratic Imaginary, and is now starting his postdoctoral research project, which is entitled Political Imagination and Rationality, and at the University of Helsinki. And Mattias is interested in, works in political philosophy and theory, and your research interests are, example, political imagination, theories of democracy, affectivity, polarization, political subjectivity, and anti-democratic political phenomena. Mm-hmm. So I see that you have some common point of interests, and I hope that we can discuss those things in the today. So I want to say that we will be recording this session, and but at the end of the discussion we won't record, or we won't be recording it, so that there is more opportunities for free discussion and sharing of ideas. I'd like to thank you all, and please, Hanna, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Anita, for this nice introduction and also for having me here. And I will share my screen. Okay, now you can see it, right? Yes. But it doesn't.
Yes, everything works nicely.
Except that it doesn't move. Okay, it does. Yeah, I just need to use my mouse. Okay. All right. So, as Anita introduced me, I'm Hanna Ylöstalo. I'm here at Turku at the moment, and I introduce to you my latest work that I have done on political imagination. I was thinking first that maybe I will give a kind of more general lecture on feminist perspectives to the economy, but we just published an article with my colleague Suvi Salmeniemi, and I couldn't resist talking about that specifically, but I hope that it kind of fits this kind of scene just nicely, and I know that the comments that I'm going to get, I got a hint of those, so I know that they are at least very much targeted at these subjects. And Okay, so I will talk around 45 minutes, and then we will have some time for comments and then discussion afterwards. And I will just get my clock settled so that I will keep some track on time. Okay, so my title is Feminism, Economy and Political Imagination. And the content of my talk is that first I'm going to say some general things about political imagination and why do we need it, and why do we need it especially in the context of the economy or economic system, or political economy and also economic policies. And then I'm going to talk about empirical example from what we call everyday utopias and how they can be spaces of rethinking the economy. And then I will say a couple of words about feminism and the future of the economy, which is kind of my own research topic and where I'm coming from. So what is political imagination and why do we need it? In recent years in social sciences and in cultural studies, for example, there has been a lot of talk about so-called death of political imagination. Especially economic policies are kind of characterized by lack of alternatives. Austerity policies are very often defended with the so-called there is no alternative arguments, and it is difficult to see kind of alternatives to the current ways how economic policies are made, and also to also this lack of alternatives, it concerns economic thinking more broadly, not just economic policies. And Mark Fisher has coined the term capitalist realism to describe this kind of way of thinking that in which like capitalism sets borders for our imagination and for our thinking about political alternatives. And in this capitalist realism setting, all ideas that are not based on sustaining capitalist economy via consumption and economic growth or waged work, for example, they are deemed unrealistic in economic policies and also in the society more generally. And there is this huge contradiction because at the same time we are living in the middle of multiple societal crises and global crises like economic crisis, ecological crisis, crisis of democracy, and health and social crisis, and increasing social inequalities. And within this capitalist realism setting, we are unable to see alternatives or kind of way out of these crises. And this contradictory situation, it results into kind of death of economic political imagination, or political imagination more generally speaking as well, and also to lack of alternatives and hope. And I have an example here from an interview about how kind of this lack of political imagination manifests itself in everyday politics. This is a Finnish politician. So they say, care is something that on emotional level, most people can agree that it's important. But when we start to discuss that we need to invest in care, it becomes only an expense. This becomes the only viewpoint that can be discussed. And after that, the next question is that what are you going to do to public debt? So this is kind of a good example of lack of political imagination, and also like lack of alternatives to current way, for example, how care in the society is organized. So utopian studies scholars have suggested that utopias could be also seen as a tool of political imagination, and in kind of everyday understanding of utopia, they are often understood as kind of places or blueprints of perfect places that are somewhere in the future, and something that we will probably never achieve. And they are often criticized not just for being unrealistic, but also because this kind of blueprint utopian societies can be seen as totalitarian constructions, because somebody's utopia is also always somebody else's dystopia. And but in current utopian studies, utopias are not understood as these blueprints or places, but they are understood as kind of open calls for imagination, and as such they are understood as methods of social critique. Ruth Levitas, who has studied utopias in sociology, has suggested that utopias, they help us to see failures in the present by expressing desire for other and better worlds, and by that they can be seen as a method of social critique. Also, and this is important from the perspective of political imagination, they shake conventional ways of thinking, because they don't aim at being realistic. So they help to see what can be, what else can there be than what exists in the here and now. They also offer radically different alternatives for current social order, and by doing that, they feed our political imagination. So, in short, they can be seen as transformative form of social critique that aim for change, and kind of offer some routes to change. So utopia in contemporary utopian scholarship, they are seen as method, not as a place, but as a method, as a process of imagination. And it can be seen as a method for imagining alternative societies, and also as a method of imagining alternative economies. And for that reason, they can be also valuable for kind of rethinking economics and the economy. Feminist utopian scholar Angelica Bammer has said that in order to bring about change, we must be able to imagine that which is not yet possible. So the starting point of social critique and also like change is not what exists in the here and now and what we can see as possibilities in the here and now, but what we want to achieve. And that's kind of the starting point of social change, rather than what is seen as realistic at the moment. So utopia as a method, it aims at detaching ourselves from the conventional truths that reduce our possibilities and our ways of thinking, and including capitalist realism. And so utopias can be seen as kind of provocations that open up possibilities for alternative futures. And from the perspective of social movements, utopias can be also seen as forces that move people, and also as forces that provoke action. So my own research has been concerned with kind of feminist political imagination and feminist alternatives to current social and economic orders. And just to describe broadly, feminist economics and feminist political economies try to rethink economy from the feminist perspective. I have been personally most interested in kind of this post-Marxist feminist social reproduction theory, in which the economy is seen and understood as a whole, as an entity that consists of both what is called a productive economy, which is often what we think when we think about the economy, and also the reproductive economy that consists of all kinds of activities that are very often done outside of the market economy and outside of waged work, like care and reproducing the labor and reproducing life and all that kind of activities that are usually and very often carried out by women and outside of the waged work, and which are very often also like invisible in the society as a whole. From this perspective, or the feminist perspective, the goal of economic activities is to sustain the basic needs of people and to ensure equality and well-being of people and also of the environment, and which can be kind of brought together with the concept of social and ecological sustainability, for example. And just to give an example of feminist political imagination, is this is from J.K. Gibson Graham's book Take Back the Economy, and it's like what's that? It's an iceberg model of the economy, and in the tip of the iceberg consists of activities that we often think that economy is that. So it's like waged labor, producing for a market in a capitalist firm, and so on, and very often also like economic policies are concentrated on this tip of the iceberg, but then below the surface, unseen, but there are all these economic activities that are carried out all the time by a whole lot of people, but which are invisible, for example, in much of the economic theories, but also in economic policies. So and this consists, for example, the social reproduction that is carried out in homes and as voluntary work and as unpaid work and so on, and by different people. So kind of the point of the iceberg model here is to say that the economy is already imagined and lived in many different ways already in the here and now. So the conditions of the economy, they are always like already different, and they are also open to change for that reason. So this is kind of to argue that the capitalist realism, that it doesn't it's not it's false. Okay, and then I move on to my empirical example, which will take most of the time of my lecture, and how the economy is rethought already in what is called, or actually what we call everyday utopias. And I have been involved with this research project entitled Polyma, Political Imagination and Alternative Futures, which is conducted at the University of Turku, funded by Academy of Finland and led by Suvi Salmenniemi. And there is a group of researchers who have been we have done ethnographic field work in different sites of political imagination in the society, and including these everyday utopias, but also in art and social activism and so on. So what do we mean by everyday utopias? We have borrowed the concept from Davina Cooper, who has defined everyday utopias as spaces and practices that experiment with alternative forms of life and creating new social imaginaries in everyday life. So they don't aim for political advocacy or something like that, but they kind of aim at changing the society in everyday life. And what makes these everyday utopias utopian sites is what is called prefiguration, that they are living alternative futures already in the here and now. So they are living in small scale, the kind of life that they would like to be more common in the future. So they are kind of living in the future in a small scale. So that's what makes them utopian sites. And we have carried out ethnographic fieldwork in 3 everyday utopias. Mustarinda, it's the picture in the one on top. And it's residence for artists and also researchers in the midst of forest in Kainuu. And then we have Oranssi, which is a housing community in Helsinki for young people with and it offers like affordable housing for people, and it has started from squatting. And also we have below we have Elävän kulttuurin Koroinen. I don't have a translation for that, but it's a community in Turku. It's almost at the city center, and it experiments with, for example, new forms of agriculture. And we have just like few weeks ago published an article with Suvi on these everyday utopias. It's titled Everyday Utopias and Social Reproduction, and it has been published in Current Sociology, and it's open access, so go and look that up. Okay, but when we did this ethnographic fieldwork in these everyday utopias, it kind of took us by surprise that people who we interviewed there, they didn't actually talk a whole lot about the ideas of their everyday utopias, but they most of the time they talked about work and labor that was carried out in the utopias, in everyday utopias, and they talked about renovating houses, and they talked about making food and negotiating in everyday life, and all that kind of very kind of mundane things. And that was like it was not any kind of work, but it was very much the kind of work that is called social reproduction in feminist social reproduction theory. So it is like this, as it's described in this theory. It's the vital yet unacknowledged and undervalued and often unpaid labor that sustains life under capitalism. And social reproduction as an economic activity, it's on one hand, it's background condition of other economic activities. Nothing else in the society cannot be done without somebody or some people taking care of our care needs, for example. But at the same time, it's also economic activity in itself. It increases well-being of people, and for that reason, it can be also understood as economic activity. And social reproduction or reproductive labor is the kind of labor that reproduces life, workforce, environment, community, social bonds, cultural memory, and ideology as well. And the kind of work that is social reproduction are cooking, caring, cleaning, communal work, and recycling, and so on. So the kind of main point about the feminist social reproduction theory in this respect is that these activities, they are economic activities as well. Very often in feminist social reproduction theories, these reproductive labor and activities, they are talked about on a very general level as a just like care or something like that. But since these everyday utopias were like really good sites to investigate the specificities of social reproduction, we kind of identified 4 forms of reproductive labor in these everyday utopias, and we have called them manual, affective, mnemonic, and experimental labor. And now I'm going to introduce each of them and how they can be seen also as sites of political imagination and what is kind of their task in this invigorating political imagination. So firstly, manual labor. It was very kind of hegemonic in this. In our interviews, the interviewees, they talked about manual labor like so much. And it was, on one hand, it was a necessity in these everyday utopias. They didn't have very much monetary resources. So unpaid manual labor, it was crucial for sustaining the everyday utopias. Like in order to be able to offer cheap housing for youth, they had to fix the houses by themselves. They couldn't afford like calling somebody else to do that. So it was something that they had to do. But they had to do a lot of work just to sustain everyday life in the utopias. And it was like renovating houses and gardening and snow shoveling and storing firewood and painting and fixing roofs and cleaning corridors and so on. And also because many of these places were kind of places in which they experiment with post-fossil life and also like ecological living, it actually requires a whole lot of work to be able to do that. So the manual labor that was done in the everyday utopias, it reproduced the material environment of the everyday utopia, but it also reproduced the community. It brought people together, and it reproduced the utopia. Because manual labor, it feeds kind of communality in the everyday utopias, and also like this do-it-yourself ethos. And they were both important also for the utopia in everyday utopia. Like they thought that the future societies should be more more like that. And also manual labor, it enabled ecologically sustainable lifestyles in the utopias. And also this unpaid voluntary work that is put to reproducing the common property. It can also be seen as criticism towards capitalist and consumerism. So it's not directed at private ownership, but rather at taking care of common property. And I have an example of manual labor. So this is from Mustarinda. Every time something breaks or doesn't work, when we are here in the middle of nowhere, it always requires a hell of an organization saga. It can take from 1 to 3 weeks that we catch just the right mechanic who drives from 250 kilometers away, gets stuck in the steep slope there with their car, and you have to call a neighbor who comes pick them up. When we finally get the mechanic here, they realize that, okay, I do not have a missing component or something, and then all this starts from the beginning. So to be able to live an ecological lifestyle, it requires a lot of manual labor. Then the next form of labor is affective labor. And by definition, these everyday utopias, they are pluralist communities, and they are driven by ongoing critique and creation, as Rhiannon, as Davina Cooper has said. So for that reason, as they are democratic sites, then conflicts are an essential part of critical everyday utopianism. And for that reason, there is a whole lot of affective work or labor done all the time in everyday utopias, also because they are voluntary communities. So this affective labor, it kind of prevents them from falling apart. And this affective labor consists of easing tensions and mediating at conflicts and negotiating, settling differences and finding compromises and so on. And this kind of labor, it reproduces social relations in these multi-voiced communities. And this affective labor, it's necessary for reproducing spaces in which critical, transgressive and experimental forms of belonging, participation and ethics can occur, as Rhiannon Firth has described it. So it's kind of utopian activity in that sense as well. And I have example of that as well. So we asked that what kind of things caused conflicts, and they answered that, well, would it be a shorter list if we thought that what did not cause conflicts, because that is an empty list. You can pick up a fight about anything, literally anything. And then another member of this community described that it was like a family, but a flat hierarchy family. There were no parents, only siblings. Then the third form of reproductive labor is memory work or mnemonic work, and Silvia Federici has paid attention to kind of how it's important to preserve also the kind of memory, cultural memory and social bonds in in the society. So reproductive labor includes the reproduction of collective memory and the cultural symbols that give meaning to our life and nourish our struggles. So it's not just preserving the material environment, but it's also reproducing the culture and ideology. And memory work in these everyday utopias, it manifests in narratively constructing and transmitting the collective memory of the community, like its ideology and its ethos. Like, for example, this do-it-yourself spirit and that kind of things. And also renovating these old houses, which was not just part of Oranssi, but it was also part of Mustarinta and also Elävän kulttuurin Koroinen, their everyday life. It was a way of also preserving the material environment of the community. And it was also about passing on the historical praxis of activism that was important for sustaining these communities. And here is an example from the data. So you carry with you knowledge accumulated over a long period of time and pass it along. We carry this place for future youth, for the next generation, not for ourselves. Then the fourth and final form of reproductive labor was what we called experimental labor. And it was the kind of labor that actually made these sites everyday utopias and as utopian sites. So this experimental labor, it lies at the heart of everyday utopias and their prefigurative politics. And the everyday life in these everyday utopias, it consists of experimenting with new and better and improved ways of living, experimenting with energy solutions, with food production and with agriculture and so on. So, and it was also what made it had this ethos of prefiguration, and they talked about a lot in these communities about living in the future, like that they were anticipating the post-fossil life and living already in this kind of future that they anticipated and experimented with the kind of solutions that are needed in the post-fossil life. And because they were not prefixed solutions, because they didn't know what to expect. So they had to kind of come up with new solutions all the time in everyday life. And it was also an epistemic practice in these everyday utopias. They produced by experimenting with new forms of doing things. They also kind of combined theory and practice, and from this setting, knowledge production is not understood as following a preset plan, but as they said, groping in the dark. So they had to experiment with something that they didn't know yet. And this is something that really made these sites utopian sites. And it was this constant dialogue between theory and practice. And I also have an example of that. So you cannot plan a ready-made model in advance and think that this is how it works. It's the combination of theory and practice that Mustarinta is all about. It strives to encourage and support theoretical understanding, but it's sometimes challenging when you have to go and clear the snow or clear the sewage or something like that. This understanding generated by practical life feeds also theoretical understanding. So just to sum up that the connections between everyday utopias and reproductive labor, political imagination, and social change. So social reproduction, on the one hand, it enables imagining and also experimenting with alternative social formations. Without that, it wouldn't be possible, at least in these everyday utopian sites. But also reproductive labor, they showed a way for change, for social change. They showed a way for life that was based on communality, do-it-yourself ethos, and also criticism towards capitalist consumerism, and also to constant growth. And for that reason, like this reproductive labor, it didn't only enable the utopia, but the utopia was very much about the role of reproductive labor in the society. And from a research perspective, these everyday utopias, they make visible the significance of social reproduction, and they also call to rethink labor and the economy, and also possibly the social change. And then just sum up and to say a couple of words about my kind of own viewpoint, and to connect this all to feminism and the future of the economy. So feminist knowledge and feminist political economy, feminist economic thinking, it's just, it can be understood as one way of using political imagination and rethinking the economy. And I'm not saying at all that it's the only kind of side of political imagination, but it's one of them, and it's something that I'm personally interested. And from a feminist perspective, the economy, economics, and economic policies, they are firstly, they are socially constructed, and for that reason, they can be also something else that we are witnessing at the moment. They are intertwined with gendered and racialized inequalities. I didn't talk a lot about that in this lecture, but it's very much at the kind of heart of feminist economic thinking. And also, most importantly, from the perspective of political imagination, the economy, economics, and economic policies, they can be challenged. They can be something different. And social reproduction, it's part of the economy, and the societies cannot sustain and flourish without it. So the economy is already something more that that we often think of. And the main point from the perspective of political imagination, that there are always alternatives, and it is vital to be able to imagine alternatives to current economic systems and knowledge and policies. And my final slide is a quote from Marian Abdulkarim and Sonia Lindfors from the book Feminism in the Nordic Region, and they kind of they talk about dreaming as a form of social critique, and it goes, we should all be dreaming. I am tired of just reacting to oppressive structures. I think that it is somehow our problem that we will never move past the fight. I think I am trying to nurture this space of dreaming, just to keep in mind what we are fighting for. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Hanna. So, Mattias, would you like to comment this?
Yes, very much. Thank you. I'll just put the sharing on here. Let's see. There we go. All right, now it should be visible. Okay, so first and foremost, thank you so much, Hanna, for a topical and very inspiring talk. It's a pleasure to be here to comment on it today, and thank you also to the people at ReSES for inviting me here today to comment and for facilitating this discussion. So to start off, I want to underscore the importance of the issues you discuss, Hanna, as well as the perspective you approach them from. The framework set by capitalist realism and the dispersion of different TINA-based political narratives do indeed merit continuous attention. And against this background, it doesn't feel surprising that more and more scholars are turning to this concept of political imagination in order to invigorate discussions of possible political and social futures beyond the kind of destructive ones that capitalist realism seems to have in store for us. So your case study into the different utopias constituted in social movements and autonomous spaces also attests to the fact that it is not only an issue that scholars take seriously, but that the need to politically reimagine social, economic, and political relations is also on the level of kind of practice felt to be important as well. And indeed, the concept of labor, as you use it, does anchor this question of political imagination to praxis, which I think is a very essential dimension to have in analysis of political imagination. The field of kind of possible interrogation your talk opens is really rich and large. There's so much one could talk about, but me being a scholar of political thinking, it is on the level of politics that I will mainly move in my comments. And I have structured my comments in the form of open questions. The first, and what I find extremely interesting, is this your focus applying feminist social reproduction theory to the question of political imagination. You stress, if I understand you correctly, that reproductive labor both enables the exercise of political imagination and a way forward to change. I think this is an extremely important perspective, which is hard to ignore once we kind of formulate it in your terms. As the kind of current setup of capitalist relations forces us into exchanging more and more of our time at more intensive rates in order to just secure the means for reproduction, it feels intuitive to think that this energy and time is siphoned from the exercise of political imagination in this kind of more emancipatory sense. So bringing this SRT perspective on reproductive labor to bear on the question of formulating emancipatory social imaginaries, on the other hand, also underlines the need for rethinking the central social institution of reproductive labor anew in order to move beyond the contemporary situation of kind of capitalist domination. So my first question then is, how applicable do you think that the social movements and strategies for organizing reproductive labor in order to imagine politically is to the larger scale in capitalist societies where so-called productive labor is organized capitalistically? Capitalism is, of course, intent on reproducing a split between reproductive and non-reproductive labor because of the free gifts that reproductive labor provides capital in its drive to create surplus value. In the circuit of the kind of reproduction of capital relations, then, so-called productive labor provides the household with the means to secure such goods as are necessary for surviving, with the non-salaried part of the time spent on reproductive labor subsidizing this cost of reproducing labor power for the buyers of labor power. So, as capitalist society must, in order to secure ever-rising profits, continuously struggle against attempts to give labor power higher shares of the produced profits and attempts to impose costs on reproductive labor for the capital owners, then at the large scale, does not fights for reproductive labor also by necessity imply fights against the capitalist organization of so-called productive labor? That is, where capitalist relations are effective, social reproduction will time and time again, by this kind of capitalistic logic, be the target of domination by the buyers of labor power. To put it kind of straightforwardly, should not struggles for control over reproductive labor also include struggles to change the conditions for so-called productive labor, as well as capitalism seems to reproduce this domination of reproductive labor. Which leads to my second question. Should we maintain this split between reproductive labor and non-reproductive labor from the perspective of the social or political imaginaries formulated in utopian political projects? As Nancy Fraser has pointed out, there has been several social imaginaries in capitalist societies which have imagined this split anew in different ways, from the kind of separated spheres imaginaries to the contemporary one, which according to Fraser formally recognizes the equality of sexes and their right or need to access the labor market on equal, capitalistically equal terms. And according to Fraser today, the kind of free gifts of social reproductive labor are extracted from those in the weakest positions of society, often female migrants who are employed cheaply in order to provide the missing social reproduction. Or these free gifts are then also extracted from women who become the kind of target double standards required to do both productive labor as well as non-salaried reproductive labor. So from the perspective of utopianism, will it not be feasible to maintain that the whole split between productive and reproductive labor could be seen as problematic and integrated to such social imaginaries which support capitalistic societies? I think FSRT scholars such as Federici or Alessandra Mezzadri seem to argue in this way. And what, if any, could be a better way to imaginally kind of manage or rethink this distinction between productive and reproductive labor with an eye to developing a conception of labor kind of fit for more sustainable futures? Yeah, I would also like to invite you to think about whether it also could be productive to think about, and this is my third question, to think about the role of political imagination in the maintenance of capitalism itself. This would mean seeing capitalism not as the kind of death of political imagination, but as a political or social imaginary, a constraining framework of political imagination built through political imagination that kind of forces us to apprehend social reality according to capitalist ontology and epistemology, in the way that capitalism also requires from us the kind of affective, mnemonic, and even experimental labor that you attach to utopian kind of spaces or situations. Here, kind of spaces of resistance against capitalism could then be kind of effectively pluralized, I think, drawing attention to resisting capitalistic imaginaries that attempt to monopolize political memory, affective ties, and experimentation, not only the so-called economic sphere. So capitalism is, of course, often discussed primarily as a material ordering of reality, and only secondarily, if at all, as an imaginary. Could taking a perspective on capitalism as a social imaginary help us in thinking about in what ways capitalist realism limits processes of political imaginal activity which are needed in order to tear down this unequal capitalist ordering of social reality? My point is also that seeing capitalism as something which kind of happens to us by the external setup of material institutions, not related to political imagination, can even work to naturalize maybe certain economic categories and phenomena such as debt or unemployment, instead of seeing the ways in which our kind of repetitive acting or laboring in accordance with capitalism as an imaginary reproduces these institutions. And I'm also very curious to hear if you think that this practice of utopian imagination could be connected to social transformation through democracy. Do you see that democracy can play a role in facilitating this kind of utopianism in our current political landscape? This has again to do with me grappling with how what you talk about could translate to this kind of more broad scale of social transformation. As I see it, it could be fruitful to think about democracy as a process in which exactly this kind of utopian political imaginal experimentation that you describe is allowed to unfold and to also influence the kind of widely accepted political imaginaries circulating in society, thus creating kind of institutionalized ways for experimental political imagination to actually influence this kind of setup of social institutions in society. It would therefore be interesting to think about if and how democratic political institutions could be reimagined to support and allow the kind of creation of social or political imaginaries that you described through these utopian projects. Next question would be about this, that is there a risk, do you see, that the maintenance of this kind of utopian spaces, which is very laborious, you describe it well, I think, also might draw attention and energy away from the kind of work of confronting undesirable political imaginaries in society. I'm here kind of talking about the kind of politics of withdrawal, or the politics of exodus, it's sometimes called, that many autonomist kind of thinkers and activists have formulated as possible answers to surviving in this current accelerating capitalist society. These kind of thinkers of exodus or withdrawal have then been criticized by drawing attention to how the possibilities to withdraw are also structured by power, to how not everyone has this kind of equal access to the kind of spaces and communities that would allow for this kind of withdrawal. And they have also been criticized by Mark Fisher, for example, for abandoning the kind of more large-scale struggles for political justice, like focusing on the state and so on. And moving on, I would also like to ask you about the potentials in non-utopian praxis of reimagining social reproduction in relation to, again, enacting larger-scale social transformation. Do we in non-utopian reality actually live with this kind of preset plans or preset imaginaries when it comes to the organization of social reproductive labor? I mean this in the sense that everyday practices of organizing social reproduction could also involve the kind of experimental dimension that you describe when you talk about these utopian spaces. I'm thinking about how in kind of everyday life, many of everyday like non-utopian life, many of us need to continuously think on our feet regarding the practices of organizing and thinking about social reproductive labor. I'm thinking also about how this kind of dual earner social imaginary, which Fraser describes, might be the imaginary norm, yes, but does not maybe necessarily adequately describe the way many of us actually live, in the sense that at least if you do not live in a coupled household with two kind of people who actually have well-paying jobs, many of us cannot organize our social reproduction in this kind of normative, imaginary way. This leads to many people, in a sense, having to invent all the time, as this projectified and constantly changing setup of working life fails to offer stability enough to many people to actually attain this kind of normative way of organizing social reproduction. I would not necessarily call this kind of everyday experimentation utopian, but it does aim at carving out pockets of providing care in these kind of non-optimal situations in alternative ways. I think also many of these more spontaneous solutions, sharing care work between friends and so on, to failing structures of social reproduction could also be interesting to take into account when thinking about the role of practices of social reproduction for political imagination. And as these kind of solutions coming from everyday life in neoliberal capitalist societies are in a sense contingent and evolving solutions to these kind of constantly changing hardships we face in everyday life in non-utopian spaces, then they could also maybe be easier dispersed in society, as they're kind of very closely connected to the non-utopian reality. This is just a kind of speculative thought on my point. Finally, I want to shortly return to your conceptualization of these different reproductive labors and connect it to Mark Fisher's point in the last chapter of Capitalist Realism, where Fisher analyzes capitalist ordering of reality as a system in which morality becomes impossible, and with it also, of course, anti-capitalist morality, as late-stage capitalism, according to Fisher, has kind of replaced morality as a collective endeavor with feeling or maybe even enjoyment in some sense. Here it would also be interesting to hear if you see that this kind of maintenance and reproduction of alternative systems of morality could also be counted among the facets of kind of reproductive labor which are needed in order to bring into being new political or social imaginaries. Yes, so yeah, these are my comments, and thank you again, Hanna, so much for an interesting talk.
Many thanks, Mattias. You have many points there, so I'd like to ask that, Hanna, would you like to have a short comment? I hope that we can discuss several of these also together soon.
Yes, thank you, Mattias, so much for your comments, and I very much kind of engage with all the things that you have said, and you have given me a lot of food for thought for later. And there is absolutely no way that I can answer all your questions now, but I have your slides, and I will most definitely think about them afterwards. And also I hope that we can maybe discuss the points that you have risen together here. But I will just say few tiny things that came to my mind when listening to your comments. Firstly, I want to say that this political imagination and everyday utopias, they are not just about rethinking labor or rethinking future, but they are also about rethinking politics. And when we hear talking about the crisis of democracy and how people do not vote anymore, and how kind of parliamentary politics is technocratic and depoliticized and so on. And one point of our research has been to say that that political imagination is not has not died, and that people take all kinds of political activities all the time, although they might be in places that we do not think immediately when we think about politics. So that has been one of the suggestions of our research, that politics is also much more than what we often think, and we also need to rethink politics. And then maybe just to pick from your point on capitalism as a social imaginary, I really liked that idea, and I think it's really important to understand that utopias are not only some kind of leftist project, for example, and anti-capitalism is not the only kind of utopia that there is. But for example, neoliberalism is a utopia, and it has been very much a political utopia as well. And I think denaturalizing especially these economic kind of structures and systems, and seeing them also as utopian sites and utopian and political projects, it's very, very important, also for social critique more generally. But I want to say a lot more, but I think we now need to move on to a broader discussion, because I would really like to hear what the audience has to say and ask for either me or to Mattias. So yes.
Wonderful, thanks a lot. So me and Jessica North will be now chairing the general discussion, and let's turn also the recording soon off. But first I'd like to thank both of our speakers for today, and also I'd like to thank our whole research team for organizing this thing. And also I want to advertise also that we will have several discussions concerning capitalism soon. Let's continue it also there. But thanks a lot.